Welcome to a new episode of HIAC Wrestling Podcast. I'm very quiet and very somber. Somber? I'm very somber this week because all those people that I ranted on last week are going to get their wish. All those Philadelphia sports fans who wanted to see what it would be like to watch the Sixers without Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons because they wanted him traded. Well, congratulations, folks. You now get to live with that. You haven't watched Sixers basketball in 10 years, and you start watching, you watch 5 games, you think you know what's going on, you demand some trades. Well, now they're both injured. So have fun watching that, everybody. We're going to stay in black and white all week because we're just doing Wrestling the Story. And it was crazy last week. Not only did we have Harry on, but we had Polygon Princess come on to talk about Nyla Rose, and it was a very well received episode. So I figured we'd just chill this week. Dan93, follow me on Twitter. Craig Lagance is here. I always point the wrong direction. Craig Lagance is here. Follow him at Craig Lagance. You can see if you're watching on Twitch, you look below our Twitter handles, and very lovely pictures, including mine, are on the screen. But it's going to be just wrestling historian this week. So not only are we going to stay in black and white, but we're just going to talk historian. So with that being said, internet willing, Craig, take it away.
Hey Dan, thank you for having me again. Last year's show,
This
yeah, it
year.
felt like a year ago.
Yeah.
Last week's show was packed with guest stars, and my best to the great one Harry Barnett and the new PP Princess Polygon Princess for joining us. Um, but we didn't get to wrestling historian, so I'm going to get it in quickly before my internet goes out again. We're going to start. First of all, I want to welcome all you fans, listeners of HIAC Talk Radio. I'm going to ask you right now if you can travel back with me in time as we go back to the Wayback Machine, back when territories ruled the world, back when titles were called belts, and back where instead of the universe, you were actually called fans, and back when sports entertainment was indeed professional wrestling. We're going to go back to February 19th, 1978 in Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens. My first part of the wrestling historian is going to bookend the last part because you're going to see something that you won't see ever again in today's professional wrestling climate. But back in the day, this was something that was um, something that you can come to expect. In the Maple Leaf Gardens in 1978, a hotbed for professional wrestling, Toronto was in the late 70s and early 80s. Well, on this particular edition, on February 19th, 1978, um, the AWA heavyweight champion, Nick Bockwinkel, teamed up with his manager, the great Bobby the Brain Heenan,
Ooh.
and they took on the AWA tag team champions, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell. So you had the world heavyweight champion and his manager take on the world tag team champions. On that same card, the WWF heavyweight champion, superstar Billy Graham, defeated legendary Canadian legend Edward Carpentier, the Flying Frenchman. So on the same card, you had the AWA champion, the AWA tag team champion, and the WWF heavyweight champion on the same card, which was
Wow.
common. It would take place um, in sometimes in Madison Square Garden, sometimes in the home office of the NWA in St. Louis, and in this case, it was Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Other times they've been in Houston. My point being that at different times during the course of a year in '78 or up until the early '80s, you can have a wrestling card with two or three world champions from different wrestling organizations on the same card. Ecstatic. Uh, that same day, February 19th, 2007, unfortunately, we had to say goodbye to one of my favorites and one of the greatest super heavyweights of all time. We lost him at the age of 42. We said goodbye to Mike Awesome.
Ugh. Ugh.
Uh,
He
yeah.
does not get talked about enough these days.
Dan, when we talk about, and I don't want to talk about the WWE Hall of Fame or who deserves what, who deserves anything, Mike Awesome, I will say, uh,
Deserves it.
deserves as much praise and as much credit for any professional wrestler who had a any type of career the way he had. Um, he was described. I mean, even his latter days in WCW, he was described in the best way. Super heavyweight size with cruiserweight speed, cruiserweight agility. Mike Awesome did things in the ring that no one, and I will put him in the category of Don Leo Jonathan, the Mormon Giant, at 6'6", could do the kind of things that Mike Awesome did in and out of the ring. He'll always be remembered here in Philadelphia locally for almost breaking the back of JT Smith in his ECW debut, his dive outside through the ropes onto JT Smith, which was in the beginning of the ECW title sequence when the ECW show started. His matches against uh, Tanaka, the chair shots that he took, the power bomb, and of course he'll always be remembered for one of the most significant matches in professional wrestling history. He was the ECW heavyweight champion when he went to WCW, um, and he, when the last minute, agreed to lose the belt to Taz, who was a WWF wrestler. And it happened in Indianapolis. Uh, a WCW wrestler wrestled a WWF wrestler for the ECW Heavyweight Championship, something that had never been done before, since, and will never be done again. But Mike Awesome was a part of history. The last time we saw him was the last ECW pay-per-view when he went up against Masato Tanaka, and we had one of their standard great matches, lots of dives and lots of table chair shots. In the end, he went to powerbomb the referee Jim Molyneux, and when he did it, he blew out his knee, and that will be the last time we'd ever see
Ugh.
Mike Awesome wrestle. I think had he not tried the power bomb on the ref, he could have got some more mileage out of him. His time in WCW was completely forgettable, but the reason he got the chance in WCW was his ECW matches and his reputation in Japan.
The thing is yeah, his WCW run was you literally marred by booking. I know I'm not allowed to say that because I'm not allowed to slander the name that is Vince Russo.
Mm-mm.
But when it comes to Mike Awesome, he was goddamn terrible at
Yes,
trying how to book this guy, which is I don't know how you don't know how to book a guy like Mike Awesome.
you bring him in, he takes out Kevin Nash in
Yeah,
his debut.
yep, flips him
Okay,
off.
why? Yeah, why not build off of that? Battle of the Giants, something. But no, let's make him that '70s guy. Let's make him the fat chick
Chick
thriller.
thriller, yeah.
Let's put him on Team Canada for a while. Let's dress him up in leisure suits.
You know, sometimes you have to say, you know what? That was a Booker problem.
Yeah.
That wasn't a Mike. First of all, never have Mike Awesome talk.
Mm-mm. Get him a manager.
Never.
Get him a guy who could talk.
Get him somebody who can talk. You never have him talk. He's how tall you say? He was 6'11"?
Yeah, he was 6'8".
He was six. Oh, all right. I thought he was a little tall. He's 6'8". He flies like he's 5 foot tall. Literally everything you wanted Sid Vicious to be.
Yes.
Because you were like, Sid, you need more aerial offense. Well, here's Mike Awesome. Don't have
Yeah.
him speak. The wrestling
Mm-mm.
ability speaks for himself. But no, let's have him have this crap. Oh, God.
Yeah.
We did get the gif of him almost killing one of the ICP guys by dropping him off a bus. So
Yeah.
thank
There's
God.
that.
Thank God for that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But we lost him way too young. 42 years old. We lost Mike Awesome February 19th, 2007.
Uh,
On the better news, February 20th was a landmark date in two men whose careers kind of mirrored each other. They both kind of started in the same place at the same time, and they both had very different careers. But on this date, they both uh, hit the zenith of their careers. February 20th, 1978, in Madison Square Garden, After a year of being in the WWF and being pushed as the prototypical white meat babyface, the All American boy, February 20th, 1978, Bob Backlund pinned
Oh, that's
superstar Billy Graham.
yeah.
Ironically enough, when Graham's foot was on the ropes and the referee didn't see it, same way that Superstar won, some will say poetic justice. Superstar won the belt from the living legend Bruno Sammartino with both of his feet on the ropes. But Bob Backlund pinned Superstar Billy Graham at Madison Square Garden February 20th, 1978, to become the WWF Heavyweight Champion and would be the second longest reign in WWE history. Winning in February 20th, 1978, Bob Backlund would hold the belt continuously for 5 years and 10 months,
Man.
a record that will never be approached by any professional wrestler in this era. But yep, it started February 20th, 1978. That same day, Dan, 11 years later, February 20th, 1989, in the NWA in Chicago, Chi-Town Heat, Ricky Steamboat would defeat his nemesis, his 20-year rival, Ric Flair, for his first and only NWA World Heavyweight Championship.
Wow.
Um, the first of their epic three matches in 1989. Um, the second would be their 2 out of 3 fall 60-minute Broadway on Clash of Champions, and would culminate in Flair regaining the belt later on that year, 1989. But Chi-Town Heat, the NWA's pay-per-view in Chicago, uh, Ricky Steamboat with would win the NWA Heavyweight Championship with a 3 count administered by Teddy Long to win his first and only world title. Uh, Flair and Steamboat obviously may argue the greatest feud in professional wrestling in terms of of match quality
Yeah.
worthy bouts.
Yeah.
Um, those guys get, and this was 10 years after their feud first started in 1978 in the Mid Atlantic area, and sadly, most of their matches were lost. You could find a few of them on YouTube, but these are two men that wrestle each other routinely uh, every night of the week for an hour for months at a time,
Yeah.
up and down the Mid Atlantic area, throughout the Carolinas, Richmond, Virginia, Toronto, Canada, that I mentioned at the top of this segment.
You.
Many 1 hour draws in Toronto. They even took it up here to Philly at the Civic Center, and the first time the NWA ever appeared in the Northeast at the Brendan Burns Meadowlands Arena. The first match, the first Night of Champions, Flair and Steamboat went 35 minutes. So a storied rivalry, but it culminated in Ricky Steamboat winning his first world championship. He and Bob were both trained by Vern Gagne. They Bob Backlund, obviously college NCAA heavyweight champion, but the Vern Gagne School of Wrestling, you don't get tired. Uh,
No.
you have a phenomenal body. You have phenomenal conditioning. You're strong as all get out. Your body looks like it's drawn by Marvel Comics, and you don't get tired. Yeah. So Bob Backlund and Ricky Steamboat both won their first world championships on this date, February 20th, 1989 and 1978 and 1989, respectively.
Wow.
February 21st, we get down to the sublime, to the ridiculous, or to the cluster Fs. We're gonna stay in WCW.
Of
February twenty
course.
first, 1993. WCW Super Brawl 3. Uh, this will be the first show that was run by Eric Bischoff and Ole Anderson um, after the departure of Bill Watts.
Uh,
Now, ironically, this would be one of some of the best matches from top to bottom on this particular card. It wasn't
yeah.
until the end where things kind of came apart. I remember the opening match was the Hollywood Blondes, Pillman and stunning Steve Austin before he was Stone Cold against Marcus Alexander Bagwell and Eric Watts. But it was a damn good match,
Yeah,
notably because of Pillman and Austin. We saw a Falls Count Anywhere match between Cactus Jack and Paul Orndorff. Uh, the Rock and Roll Express took on the Smoky Mountain Heavyweight Tag Team Champions, the Heavenly Bodies,
nice.
um, and that was a bout that was put together by Bill Watts before he left. Um, but because they weren't, that wasn't anything that Eric Bischoff nor Ole Anderson wanted. The Rock and Roll Express, Heavenly Bodies, and Jim Cornette, that would be the final time both teams, all four men, appeared on WCW, and that would be the last appearance in WCW ever of Jim Cornette. And the main event that night was the White Castle of Fear strap match between Vader and Sting, which was just a regular strap match, but sadly did not feature any square hamburgers.
I mean, it would have made it better.
Yeah,
Oh my god, I just yeah, never mind. I no, never mind.
yeah. Well, staying on that date, Dan, speaking of never mind, February 21st, 1999, Super
Oh,
Brawl 9. We started Super Brawl 3, so 6 years later, Super Brawl 9. In Oakland, California, of all places, Hall and Nash would defeat Conan and Rey Mysterio in a tag team match because Rey Mysterio was pinned. Rey Mysterio, for the first time in his career, had to unmask. This was something that came down for the WCW. They wanted all the Mexican wrestlers to lose their masks. Uh, the sad part was a couple days later, this match took place on a Monday. Rey Mysterio had a mask versus mask match against Psychosis in Mexico
yeah,
3 days later, and he was uh, roundly booed for putting his mask back on in his match against Psychosis because
yeah,
many people felt he sold out and he desecrated the tradition of the masked luchador. Ray, to his credit, went through with his mask, with it put on his mask and went up against Psychosis, his rival. And Rey Mysterio and Psychosis is the Mexican version of Flair and Steamboat, so their
absolutely.
matches are always great. And Rey Mysterio also, to his credit, uh, wrestled without his mask, didn't put the mask back on until the end of WCW. And it wasn't until he was signed by the WWE when his no compete clause ended. Uh, Also, and due to the urging of his friend Dean Malenko, who told him to put the mask back on, even though a great deal of the country already knew what Ray looked like without the mask. Like I said, he after he lost his mask on that date, February 21st, he kept it off for the rest of his time in WCW, even appearing in the movie Ready to Rumble
Yeah,
without the mask.
yep.
But much to the encouragement of Dean Malenko and the marketing geniuses at WWE, put the mask back on.
Well, two things.
Yeah,
When he re-debuted on SmackDown, my God, that place went insane.
yeah,
And you know what? It was like, yeah, who cares? He got the mask back on. Doesn't matter. It's Rey Mysterio. That again, nice loud pop. The next night on Nitro, I always remember because it was Ray versus Nash
hmm
in a singles match where Nash did the job,
yeah,
and it was pulled off very well. It was he went up for the jackknife. Ray punched him in the head a couple times, got Nash
hmm
down, and I believe it was Nick Patrick who counted the fast 1, 2, 3 to give Ray the win. And he got the hell out of
interesting.
there, and he sees just angry Nash going, "What the? Oh God!" It was beautifully pulled off.
Yeah,
I understand, the Mexican tradition of the mask and what that means. We talk about El Santo all the time, who didn't take it off until was it a day or a week before he died?
a week before he died.
Okay, he that entire time did not take it off until a week before he died. I understand all that. I look back on that in the muck that was early 1999 WCW and enjoying that.
Yeah,
Because it you had Ray, who even in was still one of the most over guys at WCW at the time in '99, going against Lex Conan, and Lex
yeah,
was involved. Conan was out of it after that, and Nash, and it was easy heat. It was easy to hate these guys
yeah,
because of it. You know, that was one of those tipping points where they're cool and all, but you know what, guys, this is you've gone too far.
yeah. And for whatever reason, Nash and Rey Mysterio were good friends. I
Yeah.
mean, Nash had no problem bumping for Mysterio, doing the job for Mysterio. It
Oh,
was Nash, of all people, that encouraged Mysterio to get his knee operated on. You know, because Ray's knee problem started multiplying when he was in WCW, and he would just get it scoped and be out for 2 weeks and come back. And it was Nash who said, "Just get the whole thing. Just go do surgery, man. Just get it. Get it. Go the arthroscopic surgery." Ray, as we know now, has had total reconstructive knee surgery twice on both knees. Um, and he's got a brand new lease on his career, which is going on 35 years now, and he's not even 50. So kudos to Rey Mysterio, but he lost his mask February 21st, 1999. February 22nd, 1984, big day in international professional wrestling history. Jumbo Tsuruta, one of the students of Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki, one of the most influential Japanese wrestlers of all time, defeated Nick Bockwinkel in Tokyo, Japan, with special guest referee Terry Funk, and won the AWA Heavyweight Championship. This was the first time the AWA title ever changed hands in Japan. Despite AWA's long history in Japan, this was the first time the AWA title had ever changed hands in Japan, and Jumbo Tsuruta was the first Japanese wrestler to ever hold the AWA Heavyweight Championship. Like I said, Terry Funk was the special guest referee, and he wore a vest and a tuxedo, and counted the 3 count to Nick Bockwinkel, and that would be that would end the fourth and final title reign of Nick Bockwinkel, who many consider the greatest AWA champion of all time. But that would be his last uh, championship, last AWA title. But it took place February 22nd, 1984, and it really put international wrestling on the map. And because no Japanese wrestler had ever been recognized as a world champion in the AWA. You had week-long reigns of Giant Baba in the NWA because he had such a stake in the NWA. When the NWA champion would go to Japan, first it was Jack Briscoe, then it was Harley Race. Baba would win it on a Monday and lose it on a Friday, so the
jeez.
NWA champion can bring it back to the United States when his week is over. But never in the AWA. So Jumbo Tsuruta winning the AWA Heavyweight Championship from Nick Bockwinkel was uh, one of the most significant title reigns in World Championship history.
Wow.
First Japanese wrestler to win it, and the first time the AWA Championship had changed hands in Japan. February 23rd, Dan, 1990, um, was a Friday night, I believe, but this was the third and final. You remember, you know Saturday night's main event. The NBC would every once in a while would take off Saturday Night Live and put on Saturday night's main event. Well, the ratings were so big that they started having prime time, and which is called the main event. The first one culminated the Andre the Giant Hulk Hogan
Yep.
match, where Andre would win the heavyweight championship. Well, this will be the third and final one, main event, where Hulk Hogan would take on Randy Savage. The key to this bout was Hogan and Savage had gone on, for a while now, but it was a special guest referee, because a special guest referee that was announced a month ahead of time was one Iron Mike Tyson. the world heavyweight champion of the world and the baddest man on the planet. The only problem was, 13 days earlier, Mike Tyson was knocked out by Buster Douglas. So, not to be outdone, the WWF got Buster Douglas to be the special guest referee for the bout between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. Um, and Buster Douglas was the world heavyweight champion, but nowhere near the charismatic personality nor the wrestling fan that Mike Tyson was. So, where there was supposed to be an interaction between Savage and Buster Douglas, went a little awry. After the bout, Savage went to hit Douglas, and Douglas threw a punch at Savage. The first one missed, the second one hit him. They call it Buster Douglas knocked out Randy Savage after two punches. Savage, of course, one of the greatest sellers of all time. But yeah, kind of fell flat just because it wasn't Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, we all know, would get his time in the WWF eventually, but what should have been in 1990 didn't occur till almost 10 years later with Stone Cold Steve Austin in the Attitude Era. But yeah, that main event. Also, that same time it was that on that same card. There's only two matches on the entire card. Dan, the
Yeah.
Ultimate Warrior took on Dino Bravo, and then they were attacked by I believe Magnificent Morocco and someone else, and Hulk Hogan came in to make the save, which turned into a stare down between Hogan and Warrior saying, "I don't need your help," and that would set the fuel to their eventual WrestleMania main event that later on that year. And that particular main event, the final NBC's main event, would do a 12.8 share
Wow.
in the ratings.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Great.
wow, indeed. February 24th, 1995, and of all places, Erlanger, Kentucky, Dan,
Huh?
uh, was a landmark date as well in professional wrestling history because it was on that date in that tiny town in Kentucky, UFC star Dan Severn would
Former
defeat,
guest on the show.
yes, former guest on HIAC Talk Radio, that Dan Severn would defeat Chris Candido for the NWA Heavyweight Championship, a title that Dan Severn would hold for more than 4 years.
Yeah, man.
And Dan Severn, whether the NWA can be recognized as a legit wrestling organization or not, Dan Severn's title reign was the longest NWA title reign in 40 years. No one had held it that long since Lou Thesz.
Nope.
Not Ric Flair, not Harley Race, not Jack Briscoe, not any of the Funks. Dan Severn's reign as NWA champion would go on for more than 4 years, a record that still stands. And he took that all over the world, all over the United States, to the WWF um, when he was the NWA champion, and took it to UFC as well, wore it everywhere. But the awesome NWA title reign of Dan Severn started February 24th, 1995, in Erlanger, Kentucky. February 25th, 1990. It's not a theme, but I just noticed there is a theme with WCW when I say the term cluster F. This is one of them. Wrestle War 1990.
Oh, boy.
I was
Oh,
looking
boy.
forward to this card because one of the matches I was looking forward to was the Road Warriors against the Skyscrapers. And this will be the first time the Road Warriors would go up against the Skyscrapers. Um, Mean Mark Callis and Dan Spivey. Well, it was supposed to be what was originally was Dan Spivey and Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious left the company. Then it was Dan Spivey and Mean Mark Callis before the pay-per-view. Dan Spivey leaves the company. So the Skyscrapers were Mean Mark Callis, who you know is the Undertaker, and a guy that wasn't anywhere close to being 7 feet tall in a mask. That guy would turn out to be Mike Enos. one half of the Destruction Crew, Mike Enos and Wayne Bloom. But he was a guy in a mask that was about. I mean, Mike Enos is a big guy, but he's not a skyscraper.
I mean, he's Mike
And
Enos.
yeah, he's Mike Enos. So that was the beginning of the how the night would turn out. And the main event that night was the hastily put together Ric Flair versus Lex Luger, because outside of the bout, on crutches, was the guy who was supposed to be in that main event, who was supposed to go over that night, was Sting.
Ah,
Yes, so you had Luger, your number one heel, uh, turned babyface to go up against Ric Flair, and it was Sting who was outside slapping, come on, kick it, you know what? And Luger, you can audibly hear Luger yelling at Sting to slap him, and that would fire Luger up. Unfortunately, the Andersons, Ole and Arn, would come in and try to get at Sting, and it would cause Jim Ross to say, "Oh no, they're going after Sting. Why did he ever come back?" Um, and Ric Flair would defeat Lex Luger by countout and would hold on to the NWA Heavyweight title. Uh, that match made possible by the great Doug Dillinger, who yanked Sting off the cage a month earlier, causing him to tear his ACL, MCL, and tear his meniscus, and throwing all of WCW into a tailspin that some say he never fully recovered, because had Sting not been injured, his world championship would have come a lot sooner, and the Ric Flair Lex Luger hastily put together feud never would have happened. But yeah, so that was
yeah.
Wrestle War '90. Um, Sting on crutches, cheering on Lex Luger in a failed attempt to defeat Ric Flair. On that same day, Dan, not a cluster F, but just a really wild angle. February 25th, 1995, right here, Philadelphia, ECW Arena. Uh, it was Cactus Jack was supposed to take on the Sandman. Sandman was told that we were told that Sandman had a concussion, suffered a concussion from a previous Cactus Jack match. So he was replaced. Sandman was replaced by the returning DC Drake from the old Tri-State Wrestling organization, the precursor to ECW that I would attend back when it was the Eastern Championship Wrestling.
Yeah.
Um, and Cactus Jack would defeat DC Drake with a double arm hook DDT. But then Sandman would jump in, and Cactus would fight him off and throw Sandman in a box. And someone would come out of the box. Someone dressed like Sandman. He had the American flag Zubaz on and the T-shirt. But when we pulled off the curtain, as it were, or the robe or the towel from the box, it was Terry Funk. Funk in a box. The return of the Funker.
Funk in the box.
And Sandman and Funk would proceed to beat the living crap out of Cactus Jack. Tommy Dreamer would come in to help Cactus, and he would just stare at Terry Funk, who was his mentor. He wouldn't attack him. And using this opening, Sandman waylaid Tommy Dreamer. So Tommy Dreamer and Cactus Jack were being pummeled, and out comes the number one heel in the company, Shane Douglas. And Sandman, Funk, Woman, all expect Shane to join in on the beating, pummel Cactus Jack and Tommy Dreamer. But instead, Shane turns on Sandman and Terry Funk, and it's revealed that Shane Douglas and Cactus Jack were the last two graduates of the Dominic DeNici School of Wrestling, and they had been close friends for years. And that was a huge swerve that I did not see coming. Almost as big as the return of Terry Funk, but the the face turn of Shane Douglas that all took place on that one fateful night, the return of the Funker, February 25th, 1995. Do you have any recollection of that night, Dan?
Very, very, very vague, but I do. I can still see the. I can still see the Zubas.
Yeah.
I can see the funk. I can see the moment in those early days.
Hmm.
Those real early days when it was still not fully fledged DCW. A lot of it I missed. A lot of it I saw on the compilation tapes or tape trading years later, or in little
Hmm.
clips. But I can still see the moment in my head. But I can't say I actually have a solid memory of that particular one. No,
Okay.
unfortunately, I'm not that old.
That's all right. You don't have to be that old. Just that you remember a good angle when you see one, and that was
Oh
it.
yeah,
Also on this date, yesterday, February 25th, you probably saw it all over social media, but here bears repeating. Happy belated 71st birthday to the limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, 60-minute man, Space Mountain, the one, the only nature boy, Ric Flair.
funny story to tell you before you move on. So I was real busy yesterday. I was real busy today too, but I was real busy yesterday, and I just forgotten it was Flair's birthday. So I do a podcast interview with my friend Aaron, who I play Fortnite with and become good friends with the last 2 years. And the first thing he does is he puts me over so much. He's a great big hockey fan and one of the best wrestling minds I've ever known. Blah blah blah. This is him saying this, not me. And he goes, "Hey, welcome to the show day. Hey, do you know whose birthday it is today?" And I'm like, "No," because it's Ric Flair. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's today." That's like he put me over, and then I immediately goddamn forgot. So funny. It's just like, well, I'm just gonna go now.
And that was Dan Colachico, everyone. Wasn't he great? Yeah, and that's Dan Colachico, everyone. Wasn't he great?
Ironically,
Hmm.
this is going to be my fault now. Ironically, we also talked. He asked me facetiously why Philly fans were the worst. He's in L.A. He's in California, so I said that's funny coming from a Lakers fan. But I did bring up the Sixers thing that's been happening the last 2 weeks with Embiid, and I said, one day Embiid is going to be gone and Ben's going to be gone, and you're going to be wishing for them to come back. And what happens tonight? Gee, congratulations, congratulations again. All right, 610 WIP. This is all your fault. Congratulations, go Sixers. Back to you, Craig.
Yeah, Sixers. I want to ask all fans of HIAC Talk Radio or just professional wrestling, if you have not seen Ric Flair's 30 for 30 on
Oh
ESPN
yeah,
Films, please do yourself a favor
yes.
and watch that. I watched it yesterday in honor of his birthday, and I still absolutely love it. Even again, if you're not even a wrestling fan, it's just a great story of a guy that lived many lives and just really um, uh, has earned everything he's gotten. It has not been easy, and being a professional wrestler is unlike any other professional athlete's life. Baseball, basketball, hockey, football players have an off season.
Yeah.
They have a break, but this professional wrestling you don't, and you get to see the toll it took on him, on his marriage, on his kids, on his family, on his regular everyday life. I mean, we had some health scares with Ric Flair in the last couple of years, but if you when he talks about how often he drank uh, every day for years at a time, this is a person who anyone else um,
Would have died
wouldn't be,
years ago.
yeah, would not still be here at 71. But again, I credit that to the Vern Gagne School of Wrestling. That cardiovascular system. I don't know, man. They don't get tired. They don't age. They,
Something to say
you
for
know,
that.
something to say about that. I mean, Flair, Steamboat, Backlund, Iron Sheik. All those guys
Yeah,
still around.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which brings me to today, of all days, February 26th, 1973. I wanted to bookend this conversation. I started talking about a star-studded card in Toronto, the Maple Leaf Gardens. Well, in Madison Square Garden in 1973, um, this is a WWF stronghold in Madison Square Garden, but on this card, on today in 1973, Terry Funk defeated some guy named Chuck Richards. Victor Rivera defeated Dory Funk Sr., Terry's dad, on that card. The AWA heavyweight champion Vern Gagne took on Eddie Graham, and he only took on Eddie Graham because he was substituting for Ray Stevens.
Huh.
So he replaced an AWA wrestler with an NWA wrestler. And the main event that night was the WWF heavyweight champion Pedro Morales defeating King Curtis, who was the Florida heavyweight champion at the time. So you had, thanks to Eddie Graham, you had Florida wrestlers, you had NWA wrestlers, you had the
Wow.
AWA champion there, and the WWF heavyweight champion all on the same card. On that same date, um, in at the Boston Garden, while all that was going on in Madison Square Garden, on that same night in the Boston Garden, Bruno Sammartino took on Moondog Mayne, and on the undercard, Jack Briscoe uh, defeated Stan Hansen. So you had NWA wrestlers all over the WWF on that night, and you imagine if you go to a house show in Madison Square Garden, and the AEW heavyweight title is defended on that card at a WWE show. Yeah,
Man.
unfathomable. But back then, promoters worked together. It was all about exposing your wrestlers to a different fan base, to a different federation. NWA wrestlers could wrestle on WWF cards. AWA champions could wrestle in Madison Square Garden. It was a wonderful time back then. You go to a Madison Square Garden match or a Maple Leaf Garden match, you never knew who you were going to see. And that's why I love wrestling back then, and that's why I love being a wrestling historian. And that, my friends, is what's called the wrestling historian.
And you know what? I really
What?
think we had a nice, good episode this week. Keep it short and sweet. We are caught up on the historian. I just wanted to get I wanted you to get your time in because next week we're going to have Harry Barnett with his shoes back. He's got both shoes now printed out. So I'm sure he's going to. Yeah, that's what I said. I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say to Mr. Chondo. So I wanted to just let you get the historian in. And I think we should just leave it at that. I don't think there's a. I am actually. We'll also be talking about Super Showdown next week because I will be watching that. I'm much looking forward to the women's title match. Very much looking forward to the Fiend versus Goldberg. I don't know why, but I just am.
I don't know why.
And for Funhouse, for people who watch Funhouse on YouTube, I'm wearing the greatest shirt that was ever made. Look up the Dalal simulator to understand why this shirt is so goddamn funny. It is a hilarious video. Craig, now that I'm keeping you awake, let's just kill it this week. Where can people follow you, sir?
They can follow me if they want on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook at Craig Ligons, CraigLiGeons.
Whoop! Follow me on Twitter. I love how I did that on the video. You'll see in the final. I just moved you over real quick. Follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83. You can listen to the HIAC Wrestling Podcast. Polygon Princess, we love you. We love you too. You have to come back on soon.
Yeah, please come back.
Please come back. But you can listen to the HIAC Wrestling Podcast on your Android or Apple phone, or your Apple iPhone. I don't know what they're called anymore. I'm old. The iPhone. If you look up VOC Nation Radio Network, or if you want to listen on your browser, thebrayhicks.com. If you want to see the video, youtube.com/DanLaw83. For Craig Ligons, I am the above average comedian Dan Calachico. We will see you next week with the great Harry Barnett again. Good night, everybody.